And now on the line is Jane-Ann McKenna. Jane-Ann is the CEO of Dóchas, the Irish Association of Non-Governmental Development Organisations. Jane-Ann, welcome back to Near FM.
Hi, Darren. How are you?
Good, thanks. Jane-Ann, I last spoke to you on Near FM in November of last year. This year, 2024, you have a big anniversary in Dóchas. Can you start off, Jane-Ann, by telling our listeners a bit about the history and evolution of Dóchas, please, and about the big anniversary you have this year?
Yes, yeah. So this year we're celebrating 50 years of Dóchas. So that's the Irish network for all the international development and humanitarian organisations. So all coming together, working together and to support and protect the most vulnerable in society, particularly those in developing countries. So those who are experiencing conflict, hunger, gender inequality and the devastating impacts of climate change. So many of your listeners might be familiar with many of our members. They would be the likes of Goal, Concern, Trócaire, also some smaller organisations like Brighter Community Worldwide, Operation Smile. So it's all of we're celebrating really all of these development and humanitarian organisations coming together and really working, collaborating together and pushing for change as well.
And can you tell me a bit about, how, if you know much about it, how Dóchas was set up 50 years ago?
Yeah, so Dóchas came together when a group of approximately 14 international organisations came together when, I suppose there was a realisation that we needed a unified voice and a collective platform for engaging with the Department of Foreign Affairs here in Ireland. And it was just on the cusp of Ireland joining the EEC, the European Economic Community at the time. And I suppose during that time as well, there was a kind of relatively new phenomenon of live television and coverage of humanitarian crises like the Biafra War meant there was kind of a greater awareness really of the different humanitarian and development issues happening on a global scale around that time. And I really felt that many of the international organizations came together really to be that collective voice, and provide, that expertise to engage really with the Irish state and the Irish state body, Irish Aid at the time. But really it's kind of evolved over that time. And we obviously do continue to advocate for some of the key issues around conflict, climate and hunger and calling for collective action. But also many of our the organisations would work very much together to look at kind of shared learning, to work on collective programming, and also to look at setting standards for the sector. A couple of things we have developed over the years are the Dóchas Guide to Ethical Communications, for example. So that's really looking at how setting the standard of how we communicate about different communities that we work with. And similarly, we've developed the Safeguarding Charter and other codes. So it's really around setting a very strong, I suppose, standard for the sector as a whole.
Okay, and you had a big anniversary conference late last week, and your conference was addressed by no less than President Michael D. Higgins. Can you tell our listeners a bit about your conference, Jane-Ann?
Yeah, so we had a conference last week on sustainable development in a time of climate crisis. And it really was kind of looking back at and acknowledging all the work that has been done over the last 50 years. But also kind of when we look forward now, we're seeing that climate change and the devastating impact of climate is actually, is going to be the biggest kind of existential threat to, humanity in the next 50 years. And really what really we looked at and reflected on as international development and humanitarian organisations, how can we respond to that more effectively? How can we come together and, bring our united voice together and calling for, the actions that are in solidarity with the Global South, who are really bearing the brunt of the impact of climate change today. And we were delighted to have President Higgins with us. He gave a very kind of rousing speech, which encouraged our members, a lot of the international development and humanitarian organizations to continue to fight the fight, really, to continue to advocate and work in solidarity with those who are furthest behind, with those who are, the most vulnerable in society. And it was really just, a call to action to make sure that, at times like this, when there are many challenges globally, there's many crises internationally, there's different political tensions around the world. And it's really about the fact that we need to, keep the individuals, the communities that are most affected by climate, hunger and conflict at the centre of our mind and at the centre of our work and at the centre of our advocacy, and really encouraging the sector to do that, which is brilliant.
Yeah, I read a speech President Higgins made at your conference last week on his website. I found it to be an excellent speech. I'm not sure if he spoke much about climate migration in it, but I think that most people in Ireland, I think anyway, at the moment don't know much about climate migration, but I think most people will know about it in the future. Is climate migration something that is already happening, Jane-Ann?
This is definitely something that's already happening, but it's particularly more prevalent, in the global south, in countries, for example, in Africa, where we're seeing that, after years of kind of dry, failed rainy seasons, people have to move, for the sake of actually being able to provide for their own family. If there has been, if we look at places like the Horn of Africa, which suffered from, year after year of failed rains, there are very little crops, there is very little food, and people are kind of forced to move with their families in order to be able to provide for those families. And this is where, that is a reality that we're seeing, that with, particularly with drought, with extreme weather events, with flooding, that is forcing people to move from their homes, from their land elsewhere, because otherwise they cannot continue to live in places that are having that devastating impact of climate. But a lot of that move, and most of that move, is happening within countries in the first instance, but also across borders, within Africa also. And, that's really just speaking around particularly the climate issue. But we are seeing, for example, with the conflict in Sudan today, there's a huge number of people that have moved across the border into Chad. And that's where we're seeing those kind of migratory flows happening in reality. No, but just, if there is anything, if any of your listeners are interested, they can go to Dóchas.ie. They can see who all our members are, who is working where, and also, get a good understanding of, as you said, some of the calls to action that the President made, that we have that there on the website as well. And they can also watch back on a few of the sessions from the conference if they're interested.